You may be seated. Before we start, let me just remind you to silence your cell phones, which always have a very bad habit of going off in the middle of everything, so take care of that first. Adonai Madom Vatedoeu Ben Enosh Vatechashvehu Adam lahevel doma Yamav kitzel over Baboker yoatzit v'chalo Lo erev yemolel v'yavish. O Lord, what is man that you recognize him, the son of a frail human that you reckon with him? Man is like a breath, his days are like a passing shadow. In the morning it blossoms and is rejuvenated, and by evening it is cut down and brittle. According to the count of our days, so may you teach us, and then we shall acquire a heart of wisdom. Safeguard the perfect and watch the upright, for the destiny of that man is peace. But God will redeem my soul from the grip of the lower world, for he will take me, Salah. My flesh and my heart yearn, rock of my heart, and my portion is God forever. And thus the dust returns to the ground as it was, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. Many long centuries ago, the prophet Isaiah spoke these words, these immortal words that were just last Shabbat read in the Haftorah. And the voice says, proclaim. And he says, what shall I proclaim? All flesh is grass, and all of its kindness like the flower of the field. And the grass shall wither, the flower shall fade, for the breath of the Lord is blown upon it. In truth, the people are as grass. And the grass shall wither, the flower shall fade, but the word of our God shall stand forever. Adonai nasan, Adonai lakach, Yehi shem Adonai mevorach. The Lord is given, and the Lord is taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Of all the Psalms in the book of Psalms, and there are 150 of them, Psalm 23 has become the most famous and the most beloved of all. Its plain and poignant message of hope in the face of sometimes unrelenting darkness speaks to the condition of every human being to this very day, though it has been over 3,000 years ago that King David wrote it, and as such beloved by non-Jews as well as Jews throughout the world, and for many, many long centuries has been a part of the Jewish funeral service. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Dear family and friends, we have gathered here this morning to pay final respect, honor, and tribute to Eugene Schreier. His Hebrew name, Yitzhak ben Shmuel. Known to all as Gene, he lived a life of accomplishment, achievement, and success. His life was a most extraordinary blend of caring and love, both freely given and warmly received. And it enabled him to grace this earth for 87, nearly 88 years, and to bring his own unique blend of caring, generosity, and kindness that touched and affected all those who had the good fortune to be a part of his life, especially his beloved family. At the end of his life, he stood as the patriarch of a close-knit, multi-generational, loving family of the kind that unfortunately is too rarely seen nowadays. A family that was at the very core, the very center of his being, a family for whom he would do anything. And in his care and concern for his family and the greater community around him, Gene found the great mission of his life. He never wavered in that. He never took his eye off the ball. And in a life lived like that, he fulfilled many of the great teachings of Judaism regarding how we should live our lives and how we should treat the people that we find in our lives. And he cherished that role throughout his life. And he did it with direction and purpose. And in a life lived like that, there is great faith and great trust in God. He lived by the words that King David wrote in another psalm, Psalm 16. Shivisi Hashem lenegdi tamid, for I have set the Lord always before me. Ki mimi ni baal emot, and surely he is at my right hand, and I shall not be moved. In the Hallel, the Psalms of Praise recited on a wide variety of special occasions, we find the formula by which Gene lived his life. Psalm 118 tells us, Zeh hayom asa Hashem, nagil v'nismecha vo. Today is the day which the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. That each day represents a unique opportunity to leave our special mark upon the world, to make it a better place because we have lived in it. This is who Gene was. This was his measure. And it was that way from the very beginning of his life. Born in New York City on September the 8th, 1936, he was one of four children, four sons, born to Samuel and Yetta Schreier. Gene was the youngest, and his brothers Arnold, Eddie, and Morty have all sadly predeceased him. And now, with Gene's passing, a generation ends and a chapter is closed. When Gene was still a child, the family relocated to Mount Rainier, Maryland, a close-in suburb just a stone's throw from Washington. And even as a small child, Gene saw and experienced depression and war. He learned very early on the difficult yet irrefutable lesson that nothing in life can be taken for granted. And after graduating from high school, Gene put into practice in his life another important lesson, that freedom isn't free. He joined the United States Air Force, where he served for 4 years. And after his discharge from the service, he returned to the Washington area. He met Sheila Silverstein, and they were married. And they were blessed with 3 children, Stacy, Scott, and Cindy. The family was part of the great post-war Jewish community of Washington, a unique community, not concentrated in one particular area or neighborhood like in most other big cities. The Jews of Washington lived in different enclaves throughout the city. Wherever the restrictive real estate covenants of the time would allow, the Jews built a close-knit and vibrant community that sadly has now faded into history. And like so many of that community in that era, Gene went into the liquor business. For over 30 years, he owned and operated Veterans Liquors on Route 1 in Beltsville. And if you're a native, you will remember the iconic sign that was in front of that store. And under Gene's direction, it was much more than just a store. It became a fixture in the community. Gene valued the community's support and gave back to them in many ways, such as sponsoring youth softball teams. And there were other facets to Gene that made him the person that he was. He had a great sense of humor. He was easy to talk to, and that extended beyond his immediate family to his many nieces and nephews who felt a special closeness to him. He played tennis well in his 70s, and he also loved a good game of bridge. And he was an avid sports fan, especially of the Washington Redskins. And the Shaare family were in their seats at RFK Stadium for many decades. For after all, if you were a Skins fan, the team was much more than a team. It was family. The years passed, and unfortunately, the marriage ended, but Gene and Sheila still remained friends all the remainder of his life. The family expanded as Stacy was married to Keith, Scott was married to Pam, and Cindy was married to Adam. And there was more blessing to come to the family. For Psalm 128 tells us that one of the greatest blessings that a person can see in life is to see what is called in Hebrew, Orei vanim levanecha, children born to your children. And this Gene saw with the births of his 7 grandchildren, Evan, Cece, Rebecca, Rachel, Ryan, Olivia, and Abby. And they are the great legacy of all that Gene achieved in his life, for they will be the ones to carry on the legacy and tell their grandchildren someday all about their grandfather. And the legacy continues, as they say in Hebrew, Lador Vador, from generation to generation. And there would be more blessing. Gene got to see the grandchildren grow up. For Gene was blessed with what is called in Hebrew, Arichas Yamim, length of days. In Yiddish we call it Geschenkte Jahren, years that were sent by God. Why some people are privileged to live such long lives and others sadly are not is something that we do not understand. For the ways of God are far beyond our mortal comprehension. But what we do know is that Gene used all of his days to the fullest extent that he could. And yet, there is a saying in Yiddish, Keine weiß nicht, was de morgen bringt. Nobody knows what tomorrow will bring. And so it was for Gene. He began to suffer from various health issues, heart and kidney failure and pneumonia, and all of it has brought us to this very sad day. But Gene lived a life of blessing, and even in those dark and somber days of decline, there was blessing there as well. In Judaism, there is a principle of Jewish law called in Hebrew, Hakoras Hatov, the duty to acknowledge when good has been done. In fulfillment of that law, and at this sacred moment, we pay tribute to Gene's dedicated caregiver, Maria Kamara, who took care of him with great kindness and love. And may God always reward you for the great good which you have done. And as difficult as Gene's physical condition was, he was able to retain his mind and his faculties until the very end of his life. A quick glance at the newspapers of our time points out just how special a blessing that really is. And at the very end, his passing was like that of our patriarch Abraham, as the Torah relates. And Abraham expired and died at a good old age, full of years, mature and content, and he was gathered unto his people. Eugene Schreier, Yitzchak ben Shmuel, was an extraordinary man who lived an extraordinary life. And in his own unique way, using the gifts that God gave him, he brought great good to the world. In Yiddish, we would say of a person such as Gene that he was a gita neshama. He was a good soul. Therefore, we hope and pray that all of the kind and righteous deeds that he performed during his life will bring blessing upon his soul. Tehei nishmas tzura b'tzura chaim. May his soul be bound up in the bonds of eternal life. May he rest in peace, and let us all say, Amen. I would like to, at this time, call upon Gene's three children, Stacy and Scott and Cindy, to come forward for words of tribute and remembrance of their father.
If you look up here, you might see a little bit of my dad. If you close your eyes, you might hear a little bit of my dad. I've been told that we have a lot of similarities. In fact, when I was up in college, I had the ambition of going to law school, but the LSAT, the law school aptitude test, soon became the liquor store aptitude test. Because things changed, and after graduation, I was with my father in the liquor store. So it's so funny. So I'm standing behind the lottery machine, my dad's down by the check cashing down the other end of the counter. Customers would walk in the store, they look at me, look at him, look at me, look back at him, and they say, "You guys look exactly alike." And what a blessing that is, what a gift that is, that there's so much of my dad in me, because my dad, our dad, your papa, your friend, your father-in-law, your uncle was a great, great man. Was a great, great man. Thank you, Rabbi Shore, for leading the beautiful service, and thank you all for being here. We feel your love. Thank you for your phone calls, your text messages, your emails, your support. I know my dad would be so honored, and our family is so appreciative of your love, and we feel it, and we thank you for that. I hope to share some thoughts about my dad, some memories about my dad, and the first thing that jumps out to me is just how much he loved his three brothers. There are four Schreier boys, and as Cindy said in one of her posts, I don't know what they're doing up there in heaven right now, but they're having a good time, I'm sure. But his brothers were his pride and joy. As Rabbi Shore said, my dad was 9 years old when his father passed away. So Uncle Arnold was about 10 years older than my dad, then there was Uncle Eddie, and then Uncle Morty. And not only were his brothers, I think, his big brothers, they also probably helped raise him along with Bubby. So that was they were his everything. And Uncle Arnold, I still remember, he lived in Cincinnati, but every week at the house when we were older, he would call every week just to check on his little bro. How's my little brother doing? He would call and check all the time. Then Uncle Eddie, was in the liquor business. My dad got into the liquor business. Uncle Eddie had an early 1970 maroon Ford Thunderbird. My dad had an early 1970 maroon Ford Thunderbird. Uncle Eddie had a place at the Braemar up in Ocean City, so sure enough, Pops, he got a place at the Braemar in Ocean City. In fact, what's so funny, Uncle Eddie's spot was Unit 1008. My dad had a wait, ended up buying Unit 1006 right across the hall from Uncle Eddie. Uncle Eddie ultimately moved to Florida, and I really think after my parents split, I think a big part of my dad going to Florida was because of Uncle Eddie. And sure enough, his house was like 10 minutes from Uncle Eddie. He was so close to Uncle Eddie. Then Uncle Morty, he adored Uncle Morty. Uncle Morty was
He's a character.
was a big hugger, had a charismatic personality, and my dad loved being around Uncle Morty. On Sunday, so my grandmother Bubby, we would go, we had a special relationship with Uncle Morty and his kids. Thank you, Ellen and Barry and Jamie and all of my cousins for being here. We're so appreciative, and Steve. But, so we lived in the same neighborhood, so we'd go pick up Bubby at the point at her, where she lived. We'd pick her up, bring her back to our house, hang out with Bubby at our house for a while. She probably got bored, then we drove her to Uncle Morty's house, and we hung out at Uncle Morty's house with their family. But it was such a wonderful family tightness. And even to this day, I know my dad, thank you for all my cousins for being here, that he was so close with his cousins. I heard a lot of favorite uncle stories this week, which was wonderful to hear. My dad had that type of personality that he was easy to talk to, and he definitely drew in. He felt so much love from Linda and Paul are here, and Ellen, and we thank you. And he loved family. One thing I want to say about his brothers, every bar mitzvah, every bat mitzvah, every wedding, there always was a picture of the four bros together. And we made it a point as kids, like, hey, get that picture done, get that picture done. And sure enough, last night we were looking through photos, and there it was. And it was nice. I think Ellen dubbed them the four morticians. They all kind of in their suits and kind of looking stoic, but it was always a great photo, great photo. My dad, as you know, he was a big Redskin fan. He was a big Redskin fan. I have so many memories of going to RFK with my dad. Section 506, row 25, seat 3 and 4, right next to the press box. And a memory of this, and I know my sister remembered this, is we had 2 tickets. So my dad would go to games, and he'd bring 3 of us. So he was probably holding Stacy's hand, maybe carrying me or carrying whatever it was, and he'd go up to the gate, and the guy's like, sir, you have 2 tickets. He's like, you want to hold them? You want to watch them? The guy's like, all right, go in. So we would get in. We had to sit on the stoop, but it always worked out. Another memory, I remember it was a Sunday morning, and I was really young, but it was freezing outside. It was so cold. This before going to the game. I'm like, Dad, can we go to the game? Can we go to the game? He's like, buddy, if you can sit outside, not freeze your ass off, and come back in, we can get to the game. And at the time, I was scared of dogs. It's like, Dad, I can't sit outside. The Gersonfield's dog would get me. That's not fair. So I'm not sure how that story ended, but knowing my dad, he probably took me. We probably ended up going to the game anyway. So, yeah, it was some great times with Pops at the stadium. Another very good memory is in '83, went to the Super Bowl. It was me, Dad, and Stacy went. And somehow Stacy didn't make that trip. Not sure how that happened.
He does still owe me a Super Bowl trip.
Okay,
He did promise me one. I gotta do that.
But somehow he messed up the flight coming back. So I flew back with one of his, guy named Frank Feldman, I believe. And then my dad was pretty spontaneous. He had a pretty spontaneous part of him. He was like, Stacy, it's me and you. We're going to Vegas. We're going to Vegas. So sure enough, Pops got a car. They drove from Pasadena to Vegas. They had a great night there and then flew back the next day. But he had a spontaneous side of him, and that was a road trip I think Stacy will probably remember. And I'm thankful that I had a great road trip with my dad. It was probably in the early 90s, again, being big sports fans. We did a Hall of Fame road trip. Got in the car, we drove to Canton, Ohio, then hit Cooperstown, New York, swung back to Springfield, Mass. And I guess it was probably 4 or 5 days on the road. And that was just great, just hanging with my dad and
Talk sports.
talk sports and other things. But we mainly talk sports.
I feel a little left out, so hold on. So Stacy and my dad had a trip. Scott and my dad had a trip. But me and my dad had a trip, too. He took me on a cruise after I graduated college, just the 2 of us, and that was fun. All right, back to you.
Nice. Yeah, as you know, a big part of my dad's life was the liquor store, was Vets Liquors. And Otis, thank you so much for being here. My dad, a memory of the liquor store when I was younger, and anyone here might have played Wheaton Boys Club sports. Wheaton Boys Club every year had a candy bar sale. You know, milk chocolate almonds, it was $1 a bar. And so my dad, big part of my dad's store was check cashing. And on Fridays specifically, customers would come in, they would line up and outside the door just to get their checks cashed. So they'd come to the counter, my dad would cash their check, give them back the money, and give them a candy bar. They all thought they were getting free candy bars. But my dad would keep $1 for himself and give them back the candy bar, and they thought, hey, that's free candy bars. They loved my dad. Every year, I was either first, second, or third in candy bar sales. Never sold one bar myself. Got great prizes, but never sold a bar. But I was Pops, like, dishing them out, give them back. My dad did take a bullet. He got shot in the store. I think a lot of you remember that back in August of 1981. He took a bullet. My dad was such a strong man.
It was a hard time.
They thought he was DOA, going to the hospital. He was actually in the hospital from end of August to the middle of November, so about 2.5 months. He went through 6 major surgeries in the first 7 days. They couldn't stop the bleeding. It was all internal bleeding. In fact, the doctor told us that he actually lost more blood than your body actually holds, because they pump him with blood, he blews it out. So, yeah, so it was but one thing, a memory of that, a couple things, but so the second or third day in intensive care, my dad kept himself a lot, but he did have 2 very dear friends. One, Ted Grossman. Thank you, Mr. and Mrs. Grossman, for being here. Another one, Dale Morton, dear friend of his. I'll talk more about both of them in a little bit. But so he's in ICU, and Mr. Grossman at the time owned a strip joint called the Silver Slipper. So he comes into the hospital, and he's got this big, looked like, you know, nice piece of artwork or something, big poster, big artwork, had a bed sheet over top of it, so nobody knew what it was. He walks back in intensive care. My dad's all, you know, tubes in him, everything. It wasn't a good situation. He takes off this bed sheet, and sure enough, it's one of the strippers. Big thing. The first time my dad cracked a smile was that when Mr. Grossman came in the ICU with a poster or something, one of the striptease ladies. So it was so funny. It was so funny.
We're very iconic and a little strange.
Yeah. But my dad ultimately made it out from the hospital, you know, after the shooting, and he went back to work. He went back to work. My dad, he had a high school degree. All he knew was he knew the liquor business. He didn't know anything else. He knew he had 3 kids, 12, 14, and 16, and a wife that he had to provide for. And that's what my dad did. He was a provider, and not just monetarily, which he did a wonderful job doing, but also through love and support and just caring, and he provided. My dad provided.
Can I tell a quick story?
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, I have to tell another quick story. So when my dad came home from the hospital, this is one that I know you'll remember. I pretended to miss the bus, and I went home with Juliana, whatever. So I'm at her house anyway, and my mom has to come pick me up. When she picks me up, there's somebody in the front seat, and I'm like, I didn't know who it was, and it was my dad. They hadn't told me that he was coming home, and Stacy and Scott didn't know either. So when we got to the bottom of our street, all our neighbors were there, Stella and Amy and Michael and Beth, the Robinsons, holding up like these big signs, "Welcome home, Gene." And it was amazing. They were all down there. So then we get to the house, Mom pulls in the garage, and she and I walk in through the garage door like normal, and we tell my dad to go ring the doorbell. And so my dad walks around to the doorbell rings, and my mom and I are like, "Stacy, Scott, go get the door." And it was just kind of like, what? Stacy and Scott got the door, and guess who was standing at the front stoop? Just wanted to throw that in there.
One more thing with the liquor store, my dad, he sponsored softball through the liquor store, and his passion, one of his passions in life was giving back, and there were so many happy things with the sponsorship at the liquor store. it was his way. My dad was in my eyes, a very successful businessman. He didn't view himself that way, unfortunately, I think. A lot of times he really didn't view himself as successful in business, but he clearly was. And his way of giving back was through generosity, and one of those ways was through softball sponsoring. He was a tremendous sponsor. He the kind of sponsor that he bought the bat bags, bought the jackets, picked up bar tabs. That was important. Picked up our bar tabs when we would go out. Paid for tournaments. And in fact, there's one story. We had a tournament up in Delaware, and at that tournament, Mike Whiting, our coach, couldn't make it up there. Otis remembers this, and neither could my dad for that Friday night. So they sent the team up by ourselves. So that probably wasn't such a good idea. We had a good time that Friday night, and that Saturday was probably the first time we ever got knocked out in 2 straight games. We were a very good team, but not Saturday morning we were not. But my dad comes up with Mike in the afternoon, and when we had to check out of the hotel, my dad went to pay the hotel bill, and I remember the guy behind the counter, my dad told me, he said, the guy looked at my dad said, "Sir, never bring your team up here again." Because it was an interesting Friday night that we had there. I've mentioned Mr. Grossman earlier. My dad had two dear friends, and Mr. Grossman, I remember going to Grossman's house on Sundays for pool parties and just hanging out with them, dinners with the Grossman family. My dad adored Ted Grossman. In fact, he had A&A Hardware down on George Avenue down in downtown Silver Spring, and we would go there Sunday mornings to see Mr. Grossman a lot of times, and trust me, my dad had no need for hardware. He had no need for, my dad, like me, we were not the handyman's type. So my dad did not need the hardware, but he loved hanging out with Mr. Grossman, loved being around Mr. Grossman. Also, Dale Morton, a dear friend. Thank you, Dale and Irma. When my dad, well, actually, a story, Dale and Mr. Grossman, my dad and his other friends, I think Ron Borton was in that group, they had a lot of fishing trips. And as Dale told me the other day, my dad was not much of a fisherman, but loved being with his boys, And they did pretty well if they'd come back. I remember we had a stack to freeze with fish, but Dale just shared how just my dad loved being with them. When my dad did come back up in 2022, he was able to drive at that point, and he would go to Dale's and Irma's house so much, because again, he loved being around them. And Irma would make her mando bread, which my dad loved, Irma's mando bread. Dale came to the hospital last week and brought Irma's mando bread and some other baked goods. At that time, my dad couldn't eat, which actually was good for the rest of us, because we could eat, and we enjoyed Irma's mando bread tremendously. But I was talking with Irma last week, and she said, "Yeah, I'm not really sure what was really so special about the mando bread, what ingredient was in there," and it's made me think that,
Love.
yeah, what's so special about that bread, Irma, was that it was a piece of you in that bread, and my dad ate it up. He ate it up, your heart, your compassion, your love, your warmth, and he has loved hanging around you and Dale being around you. So thank you so much for loving him, and for he loved you right back. Thank you so much. And speaking about friends, I do want to say, and I'm coming to a close soon, pretty quickly. Sorry. My mom was a tremendous friend of my dad. You know, Mom, thank you. You showed us that even through divorce, there still can be a friendship. There still can be a respect. There still can be a love, a different type of love, and you and Dad demonstrated that, Mom. My mom was very influential of bringing my dad back up to Maryland. When he came back up here, she helped him get into Riderwood, and you would check on him at Riderwood. Then at Hill Haven as well. My mom was with every day at the hospital when he was there, so thank you, Mom, for loving Dad. And I know he so much appreciated it. But 1997 when my dad moved to Florida. For 25 years he was in Florida, and all 7 of his grandkids, you know, it was a long-distance papa relationship for his grandkids. But he did the best he can with that and loved his grandkids, and some special stories. Summertime at the Braemar, when he still had a place at the Braemar, so we'd have trips at the Braemar together with the grandkids, which he totally loved. We'd visit my dad down there, and we'd sit by the lake behind his house on the grass, and he enjoyed that. Ryan called my dad Big Dog and Legend, and he always made him smile when he hear Ryan say that. So it was challenging just from the distance of it, but he did the best he could with that. He would come up for birthday parties and sporting events and dance recitals. So he did the best he could with that long-distance relationship. So when he came back in 2022, it was a pretty rough past year and a half of life. It was a tough quality of life. He, thankfully, a blessing of that, he had his mind, but physically he wasn't able to do too much. But one blessing that came out of that time was Maria. We were so thankful for Maria. She was my dad's caretaker, but so much more than that. She's family. She loved my dad. Their relationship was amazing. The compassion she showed to him. She would hug him. She would kiss his forehead. She made him laugh. So it was wonderful. In fact, we're at Riderwood. My dad had a few falls, and at that point we realized we had to move him into more care. That was the Hillhaven, the assisted living location. And I'm putting on my best 101 sales school clothes to my dad. Okay, Pops, this is where we got to go to Hillhaven, this is that, and the reasons, the pros and the cons was not working. Well, it was not working at all. Maria steps in. She's like, Gene, we're going to Hillhaven. I'm going with you. It's going to be okay. Is that all right? My dad's like, yeah. Done. Like, so from then on, anything that we would need, hey, Maria, can you please talk to him? Can you please talk to him and get that taken care of? So we are, you're sent from God, Maria. We thank you so much. To bring things to a close here, even in the last week of my dad's life, he still maintains a sense of humor. He had a very good sense of humor. We were at the hospital, and the nurse was trying to get blood from him, and I felt, of course, really bad for my dad, but for the nurse, too, as well. She was kind of struggling getting the blood out, and he was in a lot of pain. So she eventually finishes, got the blood out, and she looked at my dad. She's like, anything else I can do for you? And my dad looked at me, pointed at me, looked at the nurse, says, next time use his arm. She laughed, I laughed, and it was good. And another thing at the very end, it was so nice. Cindy came down from New York, and those last couple of days, all three of us were with him, and that definitely brought a smile to his face. We saw the peace in his heart, seeing all three of us together, and it gave us a sense of peace. And yeah, and then he passed. But my dad was a great man, and we're so thankful for him. And peace, peace. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Do you have anything?
Anything?
I think I shared my story. Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
The Talmud tells us that words that emanate from the heart will penetrate the heart of everyone who hears them. You could not possibly not be deeply moved by such words of tribute from children for a parent. Believe me, it's very, very special. And I know I felt it, and I was thinking to myself, you know, the young folk, they write everything on the internet with abbreviations. So they got one, IYKYK. If you know, you know. Section 527, row 16, seat 22, I know. Very, very special times. Hopefully, like they say in Hebrew, bimhera v'yumeinu, speedily in our day, they might come back. I just want to make one announcement now to make sure that I don't forget. So after the service here at the Shul, we're going to go to the Mount Lebanon Cemetery for the interment. And then after that, there will be a celebration of life following the service at the cemetery. That will be at the residence of Dale Morton and Irma Goff, and the address is 13204 Glen Mill Road in Rockville. Yeah, there seems to be a misplaced digit somewhere, so just remember 13204. Okay? And knowing Irma, she'll probably be standing out on the front lawn making sure nobody gets lost. I ask that you please rise. El mole rachamim shochein b'miramim hamitzei menuchanecha tachas kanfei Hashikhiana b'malos kedoshim uteharim kizohar horakia mazirim es nishmas Reb Yitzchak ben Shmuel, sheholach li'olamo, ba'avor shibnei mishbarito, nodav litzdaka, biyad askuras nishmaso, b'ganei Eden, Temenu chasa lochein balu rachamim yastireu b'seiser knafav li'olamim Vitzor b'tzorachayim es nishmasa Adonai unachlasa v'yanu abashalom al mishkava v'na'oimah O God, full of compassion, thou who dwellest on high, grant perfect rest beneath the sheltering wings of thy presence among the holy and pure who shine as the brightness of the firmament under the soul of Yitzchak, the son of Shmuel, who is gone unto eternity and in whose memory charity will be offered by his family and friends. May his repose be in paradise. May the Lord of mercy bring him under the cover of his wings, and let his soul be bound up in the bond of eternal life. May the Lord be his possession, and may his repose be peace. And let us say, Amen. I'd like to now ask that all those who have been designated and honored as pallbearers to please come forward.